Are you or someone you know looking to buy or sell a home? When you use a HomeGain Realtor to buy or sell a home, you can get $150. Visit HomeGain.com and click on the Promo 150 banner at the top of the page to get started. Compare HomeGain Realtors and choose your favorite. Complete your home purchase or sale transaction with a HomeGain Realtor, and HomeGain will pay you $150. Get started today by going to HomeGain.com. Welcome back, everyone, to Real Estate 360 Live. I'm your host, Ryan Sloper, joined today by my guest, Louis Cammarosano, the general manager of HomeGain. If you guys have any questions, whether it's regarding buying or selling a home, getting your credit fixed to be able to buy a home, whether you should short sell your home because you're upside down and you need to move, you're relocating because you're going to buy a job, or you're just making less income than you were before, and you're not really sure where to turn, 877-245-2030. That's 877-245-2030. Before we jumped into the national headlines, I just wanted to I got this graph from CoreLogic, which basically shows the states with the highest and lowest foreclosure inventory in the country. And it looks like right now, the lowest number of foreclosures anywhere in the country right now is in Wyoming with 0.7%. And that kind of makes sense because it's a very rural state. Alaska's 0.8%. Then we go into the highest number of foreclosure inventory, and we're going to hit, obviously, Nevada's at 5%. We have Illinois with 5.3%. Your winner, which I'm sure is not a shocker to you, Louis, is Florida at 12%. Wow. We have New Jersey at 6.7%. And New York is around 5%. It's just kind of interesting. I mean, obviously, the more rural areas, Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, those areas are all, around 1% or something, but there's not near, the amount of homes there in those areas. But
a small town in the state.
Yeah, sure. And I just think all in all, it looks like that a lot of these numbers are starting to tail off a bit. But then again, like I said, they're not taking into consideration the amount of sales that, are basically in pre-foreclosure that end up they accepting a short sale, so that doesn't go through. But I think it's definitely, these statistics are pretty good. I think that they're trending downward for the most part, which I'm happy with because as long as the bank continues to see that short sales is the best way, it's the best thing for everybody. It can really help to not necessarily stabilize the real estate market everywhere, but definitely help all parties involved. So that's, something good there. There was an interesting article, let's see, it's on the KCM blog, which is actually the headline of the article was National Headlines and Local Real Estate Markets. And I thought it's an interesting article because it's how do the national real estate headlines actually influence the local markets? And essentially what the author was getting at in this article is that, people obviously pay attention to the national media, newspapers, radio, etc. And, what are they grabbing out of these, the headlines or the news that's being reported? Because, it's one thing to be sitting there listening to, the news report, great, the 30-year fixed rate mortgage is now around 3.5%, because that is more of a national statistic as far as, the numbers, they typically are pretty much the same across the board all over the place. However, when they start saying that, how interest rates are going to affect one area versus another, it really, you have to be careful there. And I say careful because it's great that you have 4% interest rates in North Dakota, South Dakota, wherever it may be, but, there's not near as many people that can take advantage of those interest rates, especially if the overall economy and there's not as many jobs there, and how interest rates affect their local markets might be different than in the DC metro area. So I really feel like you need to be making sure that you're taking these national headlines and just taking them with a grain of salt, but making sure that you're working with a professional that can really tell you what's going on in the local markets, because real estate, especially today, has become so hyper local that, you really have to be working with somebody that has their feet on the ground in individual specific neighborhoods, knows what's going on. Louis, wouldn't you agree that, everything has moved so much now to where it's really important. I know in certain areas of Northern Virginia that you could be, literally maybe a block or two away from one subdivision to another, and there might be $100,000 differential for houses that were built in the same year. So I think that it's critical that you're working with a professional, especially specializing in your specific neighborhood, subdivision, or small city, then just taking these national headlines that are saying one thing. I'm seeing sometimes where people are getting valuations on properties, and they could be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 off. And it's really just because they don't understand that subdivision. I mean, especially when you have hodgepodge of houses where, maybe some were built in 1960, some in 1980, some in 2000. You might have a hard time coming up with a valuation, but it's just important that that professional understands that market and where they can pull comps from. I mean, I feel like a lot of the times where properties are mispriced is because the agent really doesn't have a good handle on the area.
That's right. It's important to have a professional, but you're making an even more important point, a good professional, one that is in the area, has a reputation, is not part-time, but knows what's going on because they're there day in and day out. And you're right. Home values, if you take comps, if you use Zillow or HomeGain, you have to be wary that, they just take them within a certain geographic area. But within very small micro-geographic areas, you can have big differences.
Yeah.
And the real estate agent knows that. And 6 months ago, maybe the market was hot, but something happened that, only local people are aware of that reduced the property values. That agent's going to know the difference.
Yeah, and Louis, the interesting thing is that using your site HomeGain to get your initial value to start your kind of search is perfectly fine.
Yeah, but to start, but you don't get married to that value.
Exactly. I mean, there's instances where all of a sudden, you're looking on a map, but the map doesn't really show that there's a cell phone tower that's sitting behind one of those houses.
Right.
You know what I
saw
mean?
that this weekend. I went to go look at a house.
Yeah, I mean,
there was some electrical equipment, like dump station, that was right next to the house.
I mean,
that you didn't see in the photo.
Yeah, and you think that's not going to hurt the value a little bit? I mean, there used to be, I want to say it was, who was? It was somebody that used to do the negative amortization arms. Remember the 1%, loans that you could pay the minimum balance? Whoever that lender was, I think it was like World Savings Bank or something like that. They used to have an interesting thing that if you got on top of the roof and looked around 360 degrees, if you saw any like water towers or cell phone towers or anything like that they just automatically wouldn't do the loan. So they had basically, and they're a lender obviously, but they just basically said that that was a high risk loan to them, and only because when the house goes to be resold, that is a sticking point for a lot of people.
What's the problem with a water tower?
Nothing really, other than it's just, I guess the visual. You know what I mean? I think that anything.
Yes, you got to go on the roof to see it.
Well, no, I'm just saying they use that as an example. Like if you were to stand on the roof, what would you see? But
right.
I mean, like I live in an area where you can actually see a water tower. Not that big of a deal. You know what I mean? But if it's right in your backyard, it might be. So, but all these things, like, when you're trying to determine a valuation, I think that, people go online and they're trying to say, oh, well, this is saying that this property is only worth this. And in the end of the day, you have your lender there for the most part, unless you're paying cash, that is going to hire out an appraiser to go and independently appraise that house. So ultimately, you are protected that way too, because just because HomeGain might have said 350, and now the appraiser comes back and says 360. You're going to probably get a pretty good valuation on that property, barring that there's not some sort of crazy things going on in the neighborhood. But they're all over the board. I know that we've seen a lot of appraisal problems lately just because there's short sales at one price, foreclosures at another price, and then normal sales at another price. So it's all up to the appraiser as to what comps he's pulling in there. I mean, I've seen, $20,000 and $30,000 and $40,000 differences on some of these appraisals, and the only reason why is because one appraiser valued one house more than he did another.
Sure, but also realtors that, do a lot of deals will also be familiar with different appraisers and know what their criteria are.
Yeah, I agree. The one crazy part, though, is, Louis, is that, the real estate agents don't have the ability, though, to get the appraisers that they know to do them. And this has caused a lot of transactions to actually fall through because they're sent through a lender who then probably most of the time places an order for an appraisal through an appraisal management company, a third party, that are now probably paying the actual appraiser half the amount that they're actually probably they're worth.
Right.
So how much time do you think they're spending on the reports if they're getting paid $200 versus $450?
Right, but you also have to figure that if you're working with a realtor or who is associated with a brokerage that does a lot of transactions in that neighborhood, you're going to see the certain appraisers few times to get a sense of what they're actually looking at.
Well, yeah, and then actually, if the real estate professional, like myself, actually knows what's going on, they would probably try to meet the appraiser at the house and try to say, hey, this is kind of why I listed this house, and maybe just happen to drop off a list of comparables that I used to price the house.
Totally influence, right?
Right,
Exactly.
you know what I mean? And I think that's important versus an appraiser just going out. There's a lockbox on the house. He goes in there. There's no information for him, so he's left up, on his own to figure out what valuation versus the listing agent actually having some input into the transaction.
Most people do appreciate guidance.
Yep.
In their job, most people don't take the view that they know everything and they're going to go and praise this house. If you can guide them and it's legitimate guidance, they'll take that direction. Just like news reporters, they like when you kind of send them stuff that's kind of a full story that they just have to kind of fact check.
Yeah, it makes it easy for everybody.
As long as you can fact check your story or your data on the comps make sense, they may go with that.
Yep, absolutely. Louis, we're coming up on the end of the show. Where can listeners go if they're starting their home search or they're trying to get a valuation, trying to link up with an agent in their area? Obviously, you're nationwide. Where can they go to start searching for a real estate agent?
I love the loaded question. You can go to homegain.com. You can get a home valuation we spoke about earlier in the program. You can view homes for sale. You can check out many of the surveys that HomeGain does on home values, home ownership satisfaction, the advantages of using a realtor over going FSBO, and then you can also use our Find a Realtor program, which lets you interview real estate agents anonymously, whether you're buying or selling a home, and you can get up to $150 back when you use one of our HomeGain agents. That's all at the homepage of homegain.com.
Perfect. Louis, I appreciate you. Have a great week.
Thanks, Ryan.
Guys, thanks for listening in. We will be back again next Monday from 2 to 3 p.m. right here at WNEW 1580 AM. If you ever have any questions regarding real estate, finance, credit, whatever it may be, the best number to reach me at is 877-245-2030. That's 877-245-2030. Hope you guys have a great week. Be back next week.